Hi, welcome to the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction's Friday Forum for Friday, March 10th, 2023. I'm your host, ICLR Chief Engineer, Dr. Keith Porter. This is one in a monthly webinar series hosted by ICLR, Canada's leading source for disaster resilience knowledge. Each month, we present recently completed research or other useful knowledge related to ICLR's mission to make Canada more disaster resilient. Last time, we brought you Professor Rodrigo Costa from the University of Waterloo. He spoke about how to identify the places where people have low place attachment, meaning something like low neighborhood satisfaction, and they're more likely to move away after disaster rather than rebuild. The slides and video from his presentation are available at ICLR's website, iclr.org/workshops. And next time, on April 14th, ICLR's own Sophie Guibault will present case studies from our Cities Adapt program about how communities are improving the flood resilience of municipal infrastructure to ensure their long-term durability and performance. Today's speaker, Ryan Colker of the International Code Council, will speak about off-site construction. This is where people build and inspect housing in a factory and then transport the mostly complete homes to their final location for installation. Ryan serves as Vice President of Innovation at the International Code Council, where he leads the Energy Resilience and Innovation Center of Focus. And he'll tell you a little bit more about his role there momentarily. I've been looking forward to this webinar for several months. Ryan has said that factory-built construction can fundamentally change the affordability and availability of housing. And in my collaborations with Ryan, I found that if he thinks something is important, it is. Let me give you our agenda. Before the speaker begins, here's how we're going to do our webinar today. And the webinar will last 90 minutes. Our speaker will present for about half that time, then I'll moderate Q&A for the rest of the time. Please feel free to chat your questions into the Q&A box. I'll try to pose your questions in the order they appear in the Q&A box. If we have a lot of questions, I may only pose your first question, then move on to others, then circle back to your additional questions. Our webinar is recorded, and ICLR will post our speakers' slides and a link to the video on Monday or so. So if you have colleagues who couldn't attend, let them know. And with that, I will turn it over to Ryan. Thanks, Ryan.
Great. Thanks so much, Keith. And always great to see you, and always great to chat about really big and thorny problems and opportunities to develop solutions within the building industry and the built environment. As Keith mentioned, I'm Ryan Colker, Vice President of Innovation at the International Code Council. Really have the opportunity to look across many of the sort of issues that ICLR deals with, that sort of the building industry and society at large really are working to grapple with. For folks not familiar with the International Code Council, we're a US-based organization, but work internationally to support the safety, sustainability, and resilience of buildings and communities. We do that, through sort of the core entry point of building codes and standards, but really assuring that communities have the tools to make those codes and standards work effectively. So, working with building departments around personnel training and certification, looking at new and innovative products within the built environment, the building industry, to assure that they meet standards and codes, assuring that the bodies that look at those product evaluations or that's really support sort of verification processes are accredited, really work with communities on the administrative processes around sort of code administration, zoning administration, those sorts of things. Third-party evaluation services. So in this context of offsite construction, providing plan review and inspection services within the offsite construction industry, and we'll talk a little bit sort of about what that means in a second. And then I wear actually two hats in addition to sort of the energy resilience and innovation activities at the Code Council. I serve as executive director for the Alliance for National and Community Resilience, which really came out of work between the International Code Council and the U.S. Resiliency Council, really recognizing that a lot of the work within the resilience space is focused on individual disciplines or individual sort of infrastructure systems. But if we truly think about what it means to be a resilient community, it's about a whole lot of things that make communities function day to day, but also influence their long-term resilience. And so we actually identified 19 different community functions that cut across the social, organizational, and infrastructural aspects of communities, and are developing benchmarks for each of those functional areas. So being able to sort of speak and identify the resilience measures within each of those particular community functions, but really recognizing the intersection across all of them. And so we've developed benchmarks thus far for buildings, which is really sort of the structural aspects of buildings, building codes, the infrastructure that supports the building industry, housing, which really looks at the availability and affordability of housing, and water, which really looks at stormwater, drinking water, and wastewater systems within communities. And so being able to really dive in, but also provide communities with that holistic perspective. I think, one of the important aspects of ANCR's work is really assuring that, communities don't overinvest in one area, underinvest in others, and really not provide sort of that holistic approach to resilience, really thinking about sort of, communities only as resilient as its weakest link. And if there is that weak link, sort of no matter what investment you make in other areas, that community is certainly vulnerable. So really providing, between my work at ICC and ANCR, really having that opportunity to look across the industry at opportunities to address many of the challenges that we're facing as an industry and frankly in society at large. So I know the topic today is around offsite construction, and we've certainly seen an increased growth in interest and activity within the offsite construction space. And so we certainly get many questions as to why now? What are the things that are really driving this conversation? And sort of like the resilience conversation, availability and affordability of housing is a key part of that. But we're also talking about things like supply chain, like the construction industry workforce or the lack thereof, is really sort of driving towards new approaches, opportunities to think about how do we really address those challenges. And so that really leads to a consideration of offsite construction. And so from the Code Council's perspective, we see offsite construction as addressing a few key areas that really hinder the construction industry at large. So certainly being able to drive quality, and we'll talk about sort of how we do that. But if anyone's been to sort of a traditional site construction activity, materials sit out in the rain or in the snow. You sort of don't know where the crew for framing or drywall or sort of any of those processes are coming from. You don't know sort of their level of training. And so if we're thinking about sort of things like resilience and sustainability, a lot of that is driven by quality, attention to detail, those sorts of things. I mentioned the workforce challenges. I think we've certainly seen a lot of the stories around the challenges of having a skilled workforce to drive the construction industry forward. Again, leading to sort of challenges in quality. And so, sort of thinking about a factory setting where the workforce goes to the same job location every day. Their sort of work environment is climate controlled. Their sort of highest ladder is a 6-foot ladder, so they're not hanging off scaffolding. They have all of the tools that they need right at their disposal, and it certainly creates a sort of more welcoming work environment, and really opens up opportunities for new entrants to the field that maybe we didn't sort of traditionally think about. So provides opportunities for more women in the construction workforce, older workers, those sorts of things. Certainly sustainability is a key opportunity within the offsite construction space, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But if you think about sort of the replicability of the offsite construction process, again, done in a factory, through a sort of much more controlled process, materials don't end up in a dumpster. There's opportunities for being more efficient, within the material use process, and being able to, reuse or reapply, materials throughout that process. Speed to market, which is really, tied to the next item around affordability. But, if you're developing the sort of structure of a building at the same time that you're doing the foundation, that in and of itself is a huge time savings. But you can also think about sort of the efficiency and potential replicability within the offsite construction process. There's time to be gained there as well. If we think about financing, speed to market is certainly a key piece of that. If we think about the speculative sort of builder space for multifamily housing, for instance, sort of getting the doors open early means sort of getting your money out of the project, but there's certainly also the social benefit to that as well. Affordability, again, sort of thinking about the speed to market aspect to that, but also the benefits around material usage and those sorts of things, really sort of drive opportunities to enhance affordability as well. And then job site safety. I mean, I already talked a little bit about sort of the factory setting. We'll go a little bit into depth on sort of what that factory sort of process looks like, which naturally leads itself to sort of safety issues or safety sort of benefits within the factory. But also, if you think about an offsite construction process, you don't have 5 or 6 trades working in the same area at the same time, with hoses and ladders and sort of all of those things strewn across the job site. There's opportunities for enhanced safety, which from sort of the contractor or the building industry perspective, is a huge benefit as well. So the chart in the bottom there really just captures sort of that time savings where you're doing the site work at the same time you're actually constructing the building. And so you have those processes working in parallel instead of a serial type process, and that certainly leads to time savings, sometimes 30 to 50%, which of course then leads to cost savings and many of the other things that I just talked about. And sort of because of I guess the sort of extreme challenges around housing affordability, offsite construction has really captured the sort of eye of policymakers. So in the U.S., the Biden administration announced its sort of housing action plan, and really looked to modular, panelized, and manufactured housing really as a solution to address a lot of the affordability challenges, for many of the reasons that we just talked about. We've also seen some work with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So just a couple weeks ago, they released an offsite research roadmap, really looking at where investments and activities in the offsite construction space would be most valuable. And so certainly from the perspective of the International Code Council, sort of the 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock items around the regulatory and policy environment and standards and system performance certainly are key to that, but really recognizing that sort of offsite construction and sort of ideally the housing industry as a whole sort of works in this ecosystem, tied to finance and insurance, the project delivery process, the workforce, and just sort of the overall economics of the industry. But if we think about offsite construction sort of as this integrated process that really drives towards more holistic solutions, these sort of interconnectedness and needs across all of these areas becomes even more critical. So sort of building off of this research roadmap, HUD is continuing to work on this space and is actually in the process of developing a strategic plan for offsite construction. So what are the opportunities for HUD to drive affordability and availability of housing through offsite construction? And so, really sort of setting the U.S. and, hopefully, other countries towards an offsite construction sort of approach, to housing in particular, but, I think there's opportunities, across the building industry. So actually, I'm currently in Japan with HUD, visiting factories, talking to offsite construction, manufacturers here to really learn their approach to offsite construction. And I think, certainly a lot, to unpack here. But I think really the interesting thing for this audience is, sort of the culture of Japan around hazard resilience as sort of a key selling feature of housing. And so, offsite construction is really seen as an opportunity to build in sort of that quality and that resilience. And so they're actually using offsite construction and their sort of above code programs to really drive home the benefits and the value of resilience. So certainly some interesting sort of perspectives there. And one we'll talk a little bit about, but I think, sort of the North American perspective around, disaster resilience is certainly not as strong as it is here in Japan, but I think it's certainly an opportunity that we should all really look to help support advancements in the building industry, in community resilience. So certainly happy to pick up that conversation as well. And then certainly I didn't want to leave out the Canadian perspective. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation just issued a $1 billion initiative to increase affordable housing. And really the initiative focuses on modular housing as the solution. And so that $1 billion is really focused on construction, using modular housing. And so CMHC has certainly recognized the benefits of offsite. And so, taking a step back, I think it's sort of helpful to talk about what do we mean by offsite construction? What are some of the sort of challenges, barriers, and maybe how do we need to think a little bit differently to help really take advantage of the benefits that offsite construction provides. And so, if we think about sort of traditional site-built construction, the local code official, if they wanted to, they could show up to the job site every day, see progress, poke behind the walls, know what's going on. But if we look at sort of components and in this case volumetric modules or closed panels, what shows up to the job site is sort of highly finished. So plumbing, electrical, structural systems, air barriers, insulation, all of that is closed behind walls. And so local code inspector, if that box shows up to the job site, they really don't have a way of knowing sort of what went into creating that box. And so it creates a sort of different type of regulatory environment. I think from the ICC perspective, and I believe this is generally the case in Canada as well, sort of regardless of which process you choose, the underlying performance requirements are the same. It still needs to comply with the building code in place in the jurisdiction, sort of where that project is finally resting. And so, we really need to rethink sort of what that process for verifying that compliance really looks like. And so, that really leads to sort of a discussion around, what do we mean when we talk about offsite construction? And, there's certainly a few different flavors. Generally, we think about it, from sort of the regulatory perspective as sort of open construction or closed construction. So, open construction is, whatever shows up to the job site, the inspector can really see what's happening. So, you haven't closed the walls, you haven't sort of covered, any of the connections, sort of any of that. So it's not, sort of terribly different process, for the local code official. What gets challenging is when you talk about closed construction. So a building, a panel, in this picture in the bottom right, a bathroom pod shows up to the site, with things covered up. And so, the local code official can't really see what's going on without disassembly, damage, or destruction, to the thing, which, would really defeat the purpose of, the efficiency that you gain through the offsite construction process. And so, capturing sort of that definition of, what do we mean by offsite construction? This is sort of the definition that we've established in a couple standards that we've developed in this space, and I'll cover those in a minute. but really talking about the factory setting itself, and the closed construction sort of aspects, of that building component or panel. And so that should give you sort of a pretty good perspective of, what do we mean by offsite? And, we've seen multiple different approaches to offsite construction. And if we think about, that definition, all of these, could fit that definition. So, everything from tiny houses to, residential construction, panelized systems, commercial buildings, shipping containers, which we've seen, sort of a lot of activity in that space, bathroom pods, kitchen pods as well. And we're seeing, these strategies be used in, a wide variety of settings. So single family, multifamily, hospitality, hotels, hospitals, retail, clinics, office buildings, schools. So, really presents an opportunity, throughout the building industry. So I mentioned a little bit about the manufacturing process, but it's really about sort of working a staged approach, down an assembly line. And so, sort of working through, again, the construction process in a closed setting, which really provides some significant opportunities on the quality side, and on the workforce side. And the sort of regulatory approach to offsite construction really sort of follows this pattern. So in the US, we have sort of statewide programs where the offsite construction activities are monitored through the state. And a lot of those rules sort of set up processes for when inspections happen. And so in many states, sort of either a unit or a panel that goes through a factory setting is inspected at least one point through this process. And so sort of that's one aspect of an offsite regulatory process that really shifts from the sort of traditional site built perspective. So next I'm going to sort of touch on a few sort of specific opportunities, maybe a little bit more focused on some of the resilience aspects that offsite construction provides. And so this is actually a study that the Texas General Land Office did. They're continuing to do some follow-up work, but sort of really thinking about opportunities for rapid deployment of housing after a disaster. And so they looked at, I guess, 7 sort of different, types of solutions, everything from 3D printing to log kit, to modular foldable units, panelized systems, shipping containers, kit homes, and seeing sort of how, many of these would fall, within that offsite construction definition. How these could be deployed in a disaster recovery situation quickly, which is really, one of those key aspects to certainly, the resilience of, individuals, that were affected, by a disaster. But if you also think about the community resilience aspects, keeping people within that community, assuring that sort of the housing stock, which then supports businesses in that community, can really remain functional, is important. And so they looked at these different solutions, identified a few strategies to continue to pursue, and so would certainly recommend folks take a look at this study to really sort of see, that intersection. I think one of the interesting things that they sort of thought about, sort of through this study is, you're sort of recognizing that cycle of recovery. So, there's an immediate need for housing. There's some sort of recognition that, it may not be sort of the greatest solution, but, sort of the immediate need outweighs sort of that idealized approach. But recognizing sort of the challenge where, the sort of temporary housing, sort of isn't that great, and really leads to folks being in that temporary housing, longer than they probably should be, or was even intended. And so, sort of using a modular or offsite construction approach, you can think about sort of providing that sort of basic level of housing need immediately, but then allowing for sort of building off of that initial module to create something that would be longer lasting, permanent, maintaining that community, and certainly being able to build in the resilient features that allow that community to continue to survive. I think one other thing to sort of think about in the offsite construction space is, we've already got sort of a built-in level of resilience. So that module, that panel has already been lifted by a crane. It's already, sort of gone down the highway. And there's, some thinking, some deliberation around sort of what that module, what that panel, sort of needs to have to survive, that type of process. And so you're sort of already making that effort, from sort of the transportation and erection perspective. And so, you have, I guess, at least to some degree, some level of sort of built-in test to that. But I think that's, sort of some other thing to think about as we talk about, offsite construction. I think the other piece that, we really need to think about, as a building industry is, particularly, relative to climate change, the sort of mitigation of climate. And I know, sort of the challenges within the disaster community of climate mitigation versus climate adaptation, and sort of the hazard community uses mitigation from the other perspective, where adaptation means mitigation, and that's always fun. But sort of thinking about that feedback loop, and being able to identify the sustainability benefits and the contribution of modular construction to reducing those impacts from future hazard events. And so there's been a few studies, mostly sort of at a project level basis, but out of the UK, a couple modular construction projects, 45% less carbon intensive, and so that certainly leads to broader resilience as well. So I think we'll continue to see more studies in this space, sort of building sort of this piece of the pie even further. I think one other sort of important aspect for the building industry as a whole, certainly mentioned the workforce challenges, and offsite construction really presents an opportunity for sort of new interest in the industry. So applying a level of automation that we haven't seen in the construction industry. Kids grow up sort of using blocks, which are sort of that volumetric opportunity, and really being able to sort of see, buildings come together relatively quickly. And so sort of that aspect is certainly rewarding as well. So it's really, a tool that we can use to attract new folks into the industry. So I mentioned a couple standards that ICC has developed to really help drive the offsite construction industry forward. I think I mentioned at the beginning, offsite construction needs to comply with the requirements of the building code in place, in the final jurisdiction. But those codes were written from the perspective of site-built construction, and so how do you fit that very different process, that I talked about, sort of into a regulatory structure that wasn't really designed, to handle those types of situations. And so, with the Modular Building Institute, we developed Standard 1200 and 1205, and are in the process of developing Standard 1210, which will cover the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, energy efficiency, and water conservation in offsite construction. And so, particularly looking at, what are the opportunities that the factory setting really provides to support enhancements in energy efficiency and water conservation. And so, diving into the specifics of 1200 and 1205, they really work together to sort of build out that approach to offsite construction. And so 1200 covers the planning, design, fabrication, and assembly process. So, what's the role of architects, engineers, manufacturers, fabricators, transporters on the offsite construction process itself? And then 1200, and then 1205 covers the inspection and regulatory compliance process. So, what are the sort of state and local requirements? Offsite construction often relies on third-party plan review and inspection agencies, which are in the factory doing, the inspections. And if we think about sort of the offsite construction sort of process, the factory can be, hundreds or even thousands of miles away from the final building site. And so it's just really, not efficient for a, local code official to go to a factory, that's far away. And so having that third-party process really helps. And then, you also have sort of the added benefit of a third-party industry that sees offsite construction on a daily basis and knows sort of how that process works, knows what to look for, where local code official really wouldn't have sort of that opportunity, that access, that experience. And so, sort of building off of the standards to really help sort of drive the process around offsite construction, the education of the industry, and particularly code officials is really important to ensure that the offsite construction process is working efficiently. And so we've really worked hard to develop a variety of resources that address the industry, that address code officials, to really help move things forward. So on the left, we have a primer on offsite construction and the regulatory process. So I talked about sort of the different types of offsite construction at the front end. And so what are the differences between a tiny house, a single family residential, multifamily hospitality, shipping containers, sort of what are the different sort of processes that apply to that process. And then, sort of a generalized sort of education webpage around offsite construction, covering, many of the things that I talked about, but also, again, sort of laying out, how the regulatory process works. In addition, to the primer, we've really worked on FAQs on offsite construction. Certainly, lots of questions, confusion. What are the role of state programs versus local code officials? What can local code officials ask for? What should they look for? Those sorts of things. And then, sort of how can communities, apply standards 1200 and 1205 to really, both address their affordable housing challenges, but also effectively leverage offsite construction to address, many of the other challenges that we've identified, as an industry and as society. So hopefully that sort of gives a good sense of sort of where we see offsite construction as an opportunity, some of the challenges that we're working to overcome, but I think, there's certainly a lot of excitement around offsite construction, as, one of those key solutions that can help, address the sustainability, resilience, affordability challenges that we've chronically seen in the building industry. So really looking forward to questions and the discussion that follows. And Keith, you're muted.
Thanks. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. While our attendees sort of mull their questions, I have a lot, just in case other people don't come up with questions soon. I've got several. So to start with, big picture level, you showed 6 examples of offsite construction, and I and maybe other people have seen exciting pictures of beautiful offsite built construction, like hotels built like Legos. I think you showed a photo of something like that. Houses that unfold into beautiful shapes like transformers. You mentioned the folding construction, but all of my personal experience, my actual seeing of this stuff is familiar, single wide and double wide manufactured homes being, trucked down the highway, or, you go to a neighborhood that's all manufactured housing. And you also talked about disaster resilience in the context of Texas's 7 categories of alternative housing technology. So all these different opportunities, these different categories and whatnot. But is most offsite construction gonna still be manufactured housing, or how quickly are we moving towards something more exciting?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the sort of interesting things about the offsite construction space is, you do have the manufactured housing segment, which at one point was about a quarter of the housing starts in the U.S. in the 90s. Right now, we're sitting at about 10% of housing starts in manufactured housing. I think sort of the sort of significant things that we've seen is a real transition in the manufactured housing space. If we sort of go back to the 70s. And 60s, manufactured housing was, the lowest of low quality. And, the sort of offsite construction industry as a whole is still sort of struggling, to get over that reputation. But we're seeing, sort of significant changes within the manufactured housing space to really bring that housing option, which is seen as incredibly affordable, to higher standards. So I think that's certainly an industry we'll see continue to evolve. in the sort of non-manufactured housing space, sort of there's different statistics on, sort of where we are in offsite. And I think a little bit of that is, how do you define offsite construction? Sort of what do you include in that bucket? But somewhere around 5% of total construction activities would fall in the definition, that I provided at the front. And, while a lot of the, sort of buzz and attention is around, sort of foldable units and, sort of all of these, cool things, really a lot of the offsite construction stuff is creating closed panels in a factory, which is not that different than what we do sort of on traditional single family job site. It's just, we're creating the panels somewhere else rather than having, a couple guys, on the mud pit, sort of out in front of the house, doing the framing there. So it looks a lot like, the construction process. It's just happening somewhere else in a much more hospitable, sort of environment. And sometimes those panels come together in the factory into a, 6-sided box. But it's not that different. It's just, sort of more efficient, more quality. And you're doing the foundation at the same time that you're doing the construction. So if you do offsite construction right, you wouldn't know it was offsite unless you were there the day that they actually put it together.
Right. So there's this continuum between I guess there's a hard to draw a bright line between offsite construction and conventional construction, since big components get manufactured and like roof trusses and whatnot and carried out to the field. Janet Schmidt asks about 3D printed concrete homes. Well, I see this beneficial for, I guess she says, will it be beneficial for wildfires? Well, she sees it as beneficial for wildfires. What about their earthquake resilience?
I mean, I think that's more a question for you, Keith. But I think there's certainly lots of questions around 3D printing, as a strategy. How replicable is it? How practical is it? But I mean, it's certainly one of those opportunities that we have to sort of rethink construction. I think one of the sort of challenges that we've seen thus far in the 3D printing space is are the materials that are being used sort of fit for purpose? And it's not your sort of off the shelf concrete that you're using for the 3D printing process. And so we've actually created an acceptance criteria through our ICC evaluation service for concrete used in 3D printing to assure that it meets the same requirements as we would expect from any other material that would be used in a building enclosure. So we do have that type of process in place to really help that. But I mean, at the same time, you still need to comply with any of the other seismic resistance provisions in the code, for instance. But right. You would need to do it from a performance perspective rather than a prescriptive perspective, because you're using this sort of different material that's not really captured in the current codes.
Right, absolutely. And like Janet, I've been concerned about the tensile capacity of 3D printed. I think that's what Janet may be getting at, the tensile capacity of the 3D printed concrete, because you see them squirting out concrete and there's no rebar. So I've asked people who are sort of pioneers in 3D printing about where's the tensile capacity coming from, and haven't gotten a very clear answer yet. But it's not like I'm expert, and I've only attended one or two talks on that. Sarah Stevenson says, "Thanks for the interesting talk. Are there specific requirements for transportation loading for modular units? For example, equivalent wind speed or lateral load requirements, considering inertia and drag applied at normal speed of transport?"
Yeah, so there wouldn't be sort of any building code requirements sort of on the sort of transportation of modules, but any good factory or manufacturer would certainly be thinking about those types of requirements sort of through their process. The efficiency of the offsite construction process breaks down if what shows up at the job site is useless, or you need to do extensive repair. And so yeah, I mean that's part of being a offsite manufacturer.
Yeah, I had a similar thought as Sarah. When you were talking about built-in resilience because the modules are hoisted and trucked, that resonated for me because as I spent a lot of my time as an earthquake engineer, and when I've looked at electrical equipment, mechanical equipment, and it's seismic resilience, you typically think, well, it was put in a box and it was jostled around and it experienced much greater accelerations than the earthquake is going to impose on it. But then you start worrying about, you say, okay, internally it's fine, but we see the failures at the connection points, the anchorage, the connection, the bracing against other components. So, and we found that anchorage to be problematic for manufactured housing. They blow away, they fall over because there's no lateral, because in the past there's been poor provision of lateral restraint, anchoring to the ground against uplift and against lateral forces. And it took decades to fix that problem, where now you can count on a manufactured home, well, mostly count on a manufactured home to be anchored against lateral forces. How well are the two standards that you mentioned, 1200 and 1205, dealing with the issue of connection to the ground and bracing and so on?
Yeah, so I think the important thing to think about relative to the standards is they're really focused on the process of proving that the offsite construction used meets the requirements of the code. So it doesn't set any new code requirements. It's more about sort of the process of demonstration. So what needs to be included on the construction documents to show sort of where those connections are, sort of what the manufacturer instructions are for the connections from module to foundation, sort of all of those pieces, and sort of that connection process is sort of incredibly important to the sort of whole system. So yeah, so I think that's sort of an important thing to sort of keep in mind when we talk about offsite construction. It's still meeting all of the requirements within the code. It's just sort of recognizing the variability in the process for verifying that that's actually the case.
Right. You talked about the value of offsite construction for reducing the burden on local building officials and inspectors, and that's great. But is understaffing in local building departments still a problem? Do measures of local inspection like ISO's building code effectiveness grading schedule, do they still matter? You have that primer for local officials, but what if they don't read it, or what if they don't have time? How big a deal doesn't local inspection remain?
Yeah, so in states that have statewide building programs for offsite, they're just responsible for the stuff that's done in the factory. So when that module shows up at the job site, the assembly falls to the local code official. At the same time, the local code official is responsible, for foundations and utilities and sort of, all of the things that go on, at the local level. So, that while sort of they're not responsible for the plan review and inspection process in the factory, they're still responsible for what goes on, at the local jurisdiction. And, like any other sort of construction project, or sort of building activities within jurisdictions, the code official workforce is still a huge challenge, much like sort of the rest of the construction industry. I think we've certainly seen an aging of the code official workforce. Study from NIBS actually back in 2014 saw the sort of impending retirements within the code official workforce. I don't think we've seen sort of that change.
NIBS is the National Institute of Building Sciences. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, I know. Keith, you and I have been working with NIBS for a long time, and so it's just sort of natural to do that. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge. And again, I think an opportunity to leverage technology to bring new folks into that field.
A lot of our attendees, well, most of our attendees come from the insurance industry, and with any kind of new technology, new housing technology, the question will instantly come out. All right, well, how do I assess risk to this, this new way of building? Does ICC have any advice for the actuaries and the underwriters who wonder about how do you rate these emerging technologies? Do you do anything about risk?
Certainly not from sort of the direct one-to-one approach, but I mean, building codes fundamentally help reduce risk. And so certainly, and you and I have talked about this before, having a building code is the first step, but if you don't have a rigorous enforcement process behind that, you'll get some level of benefit from having sort of a document in place, but it's really the sort of enforcement behind it that really makes it work. So I think certainly in the offsite construction process, I mentioned the in-factory inspections, the plan review process. It's much more sort of regular and documented and consistent than you may get on, or at least it's you have the ability to verify that it's actually happening through the third party inspection process. So that in and of itself should provide at least some level of sort of additional assurance. I think the other sort of piece of that, both in the offsite construction space and sort of non-offsite construction space, new technologies certainly can present value, but for the insurance industry, for the finance industry, they provide some level of uncertainty, unknown, sort of what is this thing going to do? And so we have an evaluation service that will actually look at the product, identify, what tests need to be performed. We'll verify, that those tests were done, that the results of those tests, meet the requirements of the code or some standard, for a related, type of product, provides the same level of performance. And so there's that sort of verification, process. So I think that's definitely an avenue, that insurance and finance, can look to help support, sort of understanding, new products.
Go back to an earlier question, and this business of transporting, the fact that the parts are transported and hoisted and whatnot. That suggests to me that at least in parts, offsite construction may be, may exceed code requirements because, it has to be stronger, it has to be stiffer, et cetera, than the code requires just to be, schlepped around all over the country. But you've said, you pointed out a couple of times that the code still governs these things and, is still essentially a minimum. Are the weak links in site-built construction the same weak links in off-site construction? Or do we have the same, basic strength in factory-built versus site-built because of certain commonalities? They're all bolted to their foundation in the same way, and those are the weak links. Can we think of factory-built construction as being better than site-built construction in some resilience way, or the same as?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's done right, of course, which is sort of always the question. I would say it does provide an additional level of resilience. So in addition to the transportation sort of aspects, if you think about a volumetric module, so that module is put on the back of a truck, sent down the highway, hoisted up. There's a similar module right next to it. And so you actually have two, corner members, and they're coming together. And so you can, sort of look at that as an additional, level of strength, for instance.
Cool. Well, it'll be really interesting to see the data. As an engineer who's obsessed with data, and be interesting to see these, see some disaster that these things come through, and I'd love to go out and see how well they do in an earthquake or hurricane, or I suppose all these additional features aren't going to help these things in floods, but strong winds and strong earthquakes and I guess fire, these features may matter. Those are all the questions I had, and we don't have any additional questions from our attendees. And there's no, we don't have to go to the very end. We can adjourn now. This was a great talk, and I've learned a lot. And I want to thank you again for giving us this insight into this emerging construction technology. So thanks for coming to us from Japan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Always happy to share sort of what I'm seeing within the industry. And, I think the sort of exciting thing about my work is really being able to see the intersection of sort of so many issues coming together, and being able to talk about offsite construction from a resilience perspective and a sustainability perspective, and sort of also tying sustainability and resilience together. I mean, at the end of the day, housing and construction is really about sort of bringing lots of materials and issues and performance requirements together to create things that people want to live in, people want to work in, and protect us from the elements. So yeah, I mean, having the opportunity to talk about the sort of interrelationship of all of these is always exciting.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ryan, and I want to thank our attendees for coming today. Tell your colleagues who couldn't attend that the slides and the video will be up sometime before Monday, and hope to see you all again next month. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.